I'm
Recording
so
in
excited to be
progress.
here today. I am Tracy Casper. I'm your 2024 NAR president and a realtor and broker from Nampa, Idaho. Today's summit will cut through the headlines and the hype, and it will focus on the market trends and the original data that our skilled economists are tracking and sharing with you today. And I know that you are all eager to hear from our very own chief economist, Dr. Lawrence Yun. He is going to be sharing with all of us his 2024 housing forecast and information on those top markets with the most pent-up demand. We will also have two excellent panels on deck. The first, moderated by our very own, again, Deputy Chief Economist, Dr. Jessica Lautz. She will be diving into the residential market and feature experts from Realtor.com, as well as the National Association of Home Builders. Our second panel will be focused on commercial real estate, and that will feature economists from the Associated General Contractors of America, as well as the National Multifamily Housing Council. These sessions will be invaluable as you plan your strategies under these changing conditions, and we're excited to have them for you here today. We know that they will help to provide critical insight about the economy's impact and certainly on real estate. Before we begin, let me just share a few housekeeping announcements. First, the link to the session recording and slides will be available afterwards on our website at nar.realtor/real estate forecast summit. That's nar.realtor/real estate forecast summit. They'll also be posted to the NAR Research social media account pages. You can find our social media account on Twitter, which is at NAR_research. And you'll also want to follow hashtag NAR Forecast Summit. So with that, I am so pleased to be able to introduce our first speaker, which is Dr. Lawrence Yun. He is our chief NAR economist and oversees our research group. He supervises and is responsible for making a wide range of research activity for the association, including NAR's existing home sales statistics, our affordability index, our home buyers and sellers profile report, and so much more. He has created NAR's forecasts and participates in so many economic forecasting panels, among them the Blue Chip Council and the Wall Street Journal Forecasting Survey. He appears regularly on financial news outlets, is a frequent speaker at real estate conferences throughout the United States, is one of our most popular speakers at NAR, and has testified before Congress. He earned his PhD from the University of Maryland at College Park. Please help me welcome Dr. Lawrence Yun.
Thank you so much, President Casper, for introducing and also doing this summit. And also congratulations, I look at the number on financial literacy program across high school. Over 200 high schools have signed up, the realtors have signed up in your state of Idaho to teach financial literacy, set them up so that in the adult life they can become homeowners. Over 2,000 high schools participating in California, over 2,000 in Texas, over 2,000 in Florida. This is amazing, igniting America on financial literacy. But let's go to the housing market condition, real estate market. We will also touch among the commercial real estate. It's been a difficult year. Let me share that by putting onto the screen. So hold 1 second as I do that to better explain the situation. So what we are finding is that home sales, as we are tallying up the final months of the data, the red bar would be this year. So this is an 18% decline following 18% decline of last year. So 2 straight years of large double-digit percentage decline. So very difficult environment in terms of getting transaction done. For people who purchase home, they're all happy. They have seen price increases, so homeowners are doing well, very little distressed property transactions. So depending upon where the red bar ends once the December numbers are tallied up, it could be the lowest since 2008, or it could be the lowest since 1995 situation. But very interestingly, if you look at the builders, new home sales, it is up year to date so far, and it is on track to be possibly the 3rd or 4th best year since 2008. So this growth in the home builder. this chart is slightly misleading in a sense of the following. Well, if we look at the housing start, single family housing start over the years, the red box that you see is what I just showed you regarding the builders. So builders have done well compared to the recent 10 years, but by historical standards, they are still under average, which means America is still facing housing shortage. Realtors know there's a housing shortage, inventory shortage, and it is due to this cumulative decade of, in a sense, underproduction, despite the fact that the builders have done better recently compared to, say, 5, 6, 7 years ago. The reason why the builders are able to make more sales is because they have more inventory. The red line, compared to 2017, well before pre-COVID condition, inventory condition for the builders on the red line has essentially doubled, while for the blue line shows the existing home inventory. As you are walking down the neighborhood, how many homes are listed for sale? It is only about half of what it was in 2017 or even 2019. So the differences in inventory partly explains why home sales, existing home sales, are multiple year low, while the new home sales are one of the best in the decade. Now, for the multifamily on the commercial side, we are at a cyclical high. As you can see, recently, 3 years, one of the best performance since all the way to 1980s. But the interesting development is, despite the active apartment construction that one sees across the country, the official government data, which came out this morning, the Consumer Price Index, is saying that housing rent components are still rising very strongly, 6.8% rent growth, even though the private sector is indicating the rent growth is only about 1 or 2%, depending upon which private source one looks at. So a little divergence in measurement regarding housing rent. Government data still showing strong condition, while the private sector data is indicating, given so much apartment construction, so much supply, even in areas like Austin, Texas, Charlotte, fast job growth, strong apartment demand, rents are falling because of an oversupply situation. So little difference in measurement. And another data this morning, overall consumer price inflation, 3.1%, one of the better numbers in the past 2 years, but the Federal Reserve is still indicating this may be still high. So tomorrow, when the Federal Reserve come out with their decision, it is likely they will not change the interest rate because they want that inflation number to go down to 2%. But if we were to use the private sector apartment data, we would already be under 2% inflation, and it will be time for interest rate cuts. The blue line shows the Federal Reserve interest rate policy from 2019 to the most recent. So aggressive rate increases over the past 2 years, but they stopped raising interest rate. And the key question is, when are they going to cut interest rate? I'm going to give you my opinion as to when they will start doing it. But the bond market has already tilted or pivoted to say that Federal Reserve will be cutting interest rate next year, and consequently 30-year interest rate are now approaching 7% compared to just 8% 1 month ago. And this is the pivot. So past 2 years, aggressive Fed pushed up the 10-year Treasury yield, which means mortgage rate would also have increased. But in the past month, past 5 weeks, pivoting, going down, bond market expecting the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates. Now, one of the factors as to why the Fed may begin to consider cutting interest rate is that as we go into 2024, which is a presidential election year, which should not impact the monetary policy, but maybe something is subconsciously thinking, is that job market is beginning to soften. With each passing month, jobs are being added, but as you can see, it's becoming lighter and lighter, and Federal Reserve certainly do not want to see the number turn negative. If we could look across the country, we see different job growth situation. This is comparing pre-COVID condition to the latest. So essentially, over 3-year time span, how much job creation. Rocky Mountain State fast job creation, 10% range. Texas, 8.8%, Florida, 9.1%, one of the top performers. Then you have a trailers falling behind, like New York, yet to fully recover. Hawaii is down because the disaster that happened in Maui that has held back some of the tourism activity, but you can see your state where you stand. So job growth will be the determinant for long-term housing demand, whether rental or home buying, even though in the short term, it may be impacted by affordability, mortgage rate changes, but the long-term housing demand determined by the job situation. And in fact, home prices have risen solidly across all 50 states over the past 3 years. So again, darker blue color, faster price increase. State of Maine, wow, people are loving to go to Maine, strong price increases. And even among more sluggish states like Illinois, 35% increase in the past 3 years. So homeowners are certainly happy. And you can see it in the wealth comparison between renters and homeowners, substantial, according to the Federal Reserve. So their most recently published data show that typical homeowner has $396,000, while the renters barely visible, showing that over the long term, homeowners build wealth over time. Maybe in the short term, there's a little price fluctuation, but people build wealth over time if one owns a property in America. So the forecast is that I believe that average mortgage rate next year will be in the mid 6% range. I actually put 6.3% condition, and there are 3 reasons for this. First, the rents will calm down in the official data because there is a lag with the private sector data, and that will make the consumer price inflation much more comfortable. Remember the weakness in the job market. The Federal Reserve will cut interest rate 4 times, I believe, next year, starting with late spring as their first cut. Community banks are suffering from high interest rate, and this special credit line is scheduled to end in March. Either the Federal Reserve has to extend it or help the community bank by cutting interest rate. So I think that's another motivation to cut interest rates. And little esoteric spread between government bond and mortgage rate today is abnormally high. As it returns to normal, that's gonna bring down mortgage rate a little lower. So the forecast is that home sales after 2 straight years of difficulty will begin to rise next year. If you're focusing only on the home builders, the blue bar, they have already improved this year, and they will continue to improve next year. But the orange bar is existing home sales, the dominant home sales, and they will begin to recover next year. We also have top 10 market with large pent-up demand and pent-up supply, meaning that how many homeowners have stayed in their home for a long period and have delayed. So we have 10 metrics: job growth, where the high income millennials are moving, where the renters currently qualify for buying a home and such. So we identify 10 markets. Of course, people do not have to agree with all these 10, then you will have different markets. And based on this, what we are finding is that the areas with strong home sales growth potential next year in the South region would be Austin, Dallas, Houston, Nashville to come back, Dayton because of affordability. While in the East region, you have Durham, Chapel Hill, which I think could become the next Austin, and then 2 Pennsylvania cities because there's large pent-up sellers who want to list their property. Portland, Maine is drawing many high-income millennials to the region, and Washington, D.C. areas which have been sluggish, but I think they are primed to return. But there is one risk factor, which is that first-time buyers are struggling because of affordability condition, and you can see how much down payment they are making, essentially 0 to 5%, 40% of first-time buyers. So if we were to ask first-time buyers to say, you know what, you have to now pay additional for the buyer representation. So in that case, you can imagine how many first-time buyers would struggle to come up with additional cash. Maybe they need to borrow additional amount for buyer representation, or they have to do it themselves. But if they do them by themselves, then they face challenges. finding the right property, understanding the process, paperwork. These were the challenges among successful recent first-time buyers. So the first-time buyers could be in a jam if they are forced to come up with the buyer representation fee, or if they want to do it themselves, which they could get taken advantage by the sellers. So a little difficult situation that the first-time buyer may be facing in the upcoming year. While under the current system, the builders have a great business model. They're saying, bring your buyer, we will pay the commission to the buyer agent. So, it's thriving under free market system, good business model to do. And the first-time buyers, essentially, they were saying that they are very thankful to the realtors who helped them out in their process. So you can see how much high rating they are providing. One final graph related to the risk is that the demographic makeup. We know that the younger generation are more diverse. You can go to any school district, look at the demographic of kindergarten student versus high school seniors, and you see the variation, more diversity among younger generation. Same situation, first-time buyers, we see more diverse demographics, while for the home sellers, because of multi-generational wealth acquirement, you see that there's less diversity among home sellers. So if the first-time buyers are put at disadvantage, either come up with additional funds to pay buyer representation, or they want to do it by themselves, this is a very difficult situation where we are trying to make progress on more opportunity for more Americans to become homeowners with financial literacy. But with potential lawsuit out there, it could really wreak havoc to the first-time buyers. So with this, I'm going to stop, and now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Jessica Laus, who will cover on the residential side.
Thank you, Lawrence. I appreciate that introduction. I am actually going to be joined for this panel with Danielle Hale, who's the chief economist from Realtor.com, and Danushka Nanayakari-Skillington, who's the assistant vice president of forecasting and analysis at the National Association of Home Builders. They're really key in the real estate industry in really understanding all-encompassing what is happening right now. I want to start with Danielle. Danielle, you all just released a new forecast, and you just heard Lawrence's forecast. So coming hot off the presses, how does your all's compare? And do you want to kick us off with what your thoughts are right now, looking at the residential market?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I would say there's quite a bit of alignment between our forecast and Lawrence's, but some discrepancies. One thing that I think is going to be a bright spot for buyers in 2024, many of whom are probably worn out from the persistent theme of a lack of affordability that we've seen in the housing market, is that we actually do expect affordability to start to improve in 2024. We're not going to see a big turnaround, but I do think we're going to see a baby step in the right direction. We expect that home prices are going to soften a little bit, not enough to wipe out the significant equity gains that existing homeowners have, but perhaps enough to make it a little bit easier for buyers to get into the housing market, especially first-time home buyers who haven't benefited from the equity buildup that existing homeowners have as home prices have gone up significantly over the last couple of years. So that's one bright spot. The other thing is we also expect mortgage rates to turn the corner. They have, in fact, been dropping pretty swiftly in recent weeks. We expect that decline to continue as we move into 2024, albeit a little more slowly, I think, than Lawrence is expecting. We expect to see mortgage rates at about 6.5% at the end of 2024 and to average about 6.8% for the calendar year as a whole. That will be actually roughly on par with where mortgage rates have averaged in 2023, but almost a mirror image. So instead of starting low and increasing throughout the year as we saw in 2023, as there was this reassessment of how long the Fed was going to need to keep its policy rate elevated, we think as we look ahead into 2024, we will see that inflation continues to come in on target. I do think that we agree with Lawrence that the slowdown in market rents is going to be a key driver of improvements in inflation. And so we will see that help push mortgage rates lower, which is another factor that's going to help improve affordability for home buyers.
And just looking at that, on a national scale, I know Lawrence talked about our top 10 markets and expectations. Do you have any market differences when you're thinking about the nation as a whole, where there's opportunities perhaps, especially for first-time home buyers who have really struggled to get into today's market?
Yeah, so in our top markets of 2024 report, we identify areas where we see the most housing activity in 2024, and that's based on combined home sales and home price growth activity. So these markets are definitely going to be good for sellers, maybe still in some cases a little bit challenging for buyers, but some of the markets, the cluster of them that is in the Midwest and the Northeast, are going to be good for both buyers and sellers because they offer relative affordability. Home prices in this region remain significantly below the national average. And so people who are relocating from high cost areas can see significant savings by moving to these markets. Our number one market is Toledo, Ohio. It exemplifies this trend. It's followed by number two, which is Rochester, New York. Again, falls right in line with this trend. The other area that we think is going to be a bit of a bright spot in 2024 is Southern California. And that may be a bit of a surprise. The Southern California market has had a really difficult 2023. We do think that we're going to see sales start to bounce back from extraordinarily low levels in the last year, and home prices should start to recover in that region. It remains, of interest. It's still a very solid market for people to live in, and so we think we're going to see a bit of a bounce back that's going to help propel those areas, particularly LA, San Diego, Riverside, and Oxnard, to the top of our list in 2024.
All right, Danielle. Well, that is a surprise looking at those markets, perhaps especially Southern California. So hopefully our friends in California are hearing some potentially good news moving into 2024. Danushka, I want to turn over to you. I know that housing starts have been fits and starts. They're trying to recover, as Lawrence showed beautifully on that graph. Does 2024 look better?
I feel like you can't get worse than this year, simply because this year has been really rocky, especially for single family. Once the interest rates started to increase, single family was really hit hard. So for calendar year, we are expecting a growth for next year around 950,000 units. Still, I don't think we'll get to the million that we desperately need. I think Lawrence mentioned too that we have a housing deficit because of a decade of underbuilding. So we've estimated about like 1.5 million housing units that we really need. So I think the 1 million mark might have to wait until 2025, but nevertheless, calendar gains for single family. Multifamily, on the other hand, we're expecting a slowdown, not because there's any less demand, but the fact that there's over 1 million units of apartments under construction right now. So we expect these to come into the market. So because of that, we expect the starts to slow down next year. But remodeling market still holding strong. We are staying longer in our homes. And then we're still doing remodeling projects, getting that, the dipping into that home equity that, if you're lucky to own a home before the price has increased, we expect the remodeling market to make up pretty good ground in the next couple of years.
Yeah, the lock-in effect is real and people need to reinvent their homes in different ways. And whether that means aging in place or maybe creating a bedroom or just looking anywhere in their house for extra added room, whether that's an attic or a basement, certainly has become popular. You talk about the headwinds that builders have. Can you go into detail about what those are, especially for our realtor friends who are desperately saying we need more housing inventory? Why can't builders just build? I know the answer is not just very easy. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that we've had for decade, I think, for the last few years has been the fact that we don't have enough skilled labor. We have, around 8 million open jobs around the economy. For construction trades, it's over 400,000 jobs that it's open right now. So, you don't have enough workers. That means that the wages are higher too. And the biggest issue is that the fact that, the older workers are leaving. With that, they're taking the skills and the productivity as well. So the younger workers, if we are lucky to have younger workers, not many people want to join the construction trades. So we desperately need younger workers. So that's an issue that we are grappling with. NHB, one of our biggest advocacy policy issues is that going to elementary schools, middle schools, trying to convince parents even, that the trades could be a good path. And building materials on a whole, year-over-year growth rates have come down. It's actually flat at this point. That's because of lumber prices. Lumber prices were over $1,500 per 1,000 board feet last summer, has come back down to earth. It's actually under $400 at this point, which is fantastic. Again, we are concerned because we don't have a concrete lumber agreement with Canada at this point. So we could kind of, seesaw again next year too. But that's just lumber. We have the transformer issue. There are, builders are waiting for transformers for months at end at this point. Some of these subdivisions can't be even occupied because that's a huge lag. And then the quality of the building materials are another concern that the builders are saying. Financing is another issue, a big issue, especially for the smaller builders. It might not be a big issue for the big builders, but for smaller builders, because of the Fed rate increase, you go from around 5 to 6% to now they're paying over 13%. So that's a big price increase. So that affects the lot development, the construction costs. So these are some of these issues. And of course, the lot shortage. We just don't have enough lots. So that goes back to zoning reforms at the local levels. We need to bring in more land. And then, of course, 75% of the land in the US is zoned exclusively for single family detached. All these NIMBYism, we got to tackle that at the local level. So yeah, those are some of the issues.
Okay, so that's not just one. So there is certainly opportunities there, perhaps, but more YIMBYism, less NIMBYism in local communities could certainly help for realtors. Boots on the ground, you all have a voice in your local communities. So certainly that could be one pathway. Certainly encouraging Youth of America to look outside of just going to college for a liberal arts degree, expand the opportunities that they could have there for sure. I want to shift gears here. Student loan debt is a huge issue, alluding to that as we talk about liberal arts. That's certainly a huge hurdle into homeownership. But Danielle, we have said, and I remember working together at NAR in the research group here, and I think maybe a decade ago, we were saying this timeframe is going to be the year of the millennial. They are going to enter into homeownership, and unfortunately, that is just not happening at the rate that it should be. Certainly student loan debt, but affordability, inventory, as you both have talked about. Do we see an opportunity for them moving forward? Is there a chance?
I mean, yes, I think there's a chance, but I'm an optimist. I do think they've continued to face some pretty severe challenges. And if you look at the homeownership rate data, some people point to the homeownership rate data and say, look, homeownership is fine. Like, it hasn't really declined. It continues to climb. But what we're seeing in that homeownership rate data is that the aging of the population is masking this lack of opportunity for younger generations. If you drill down and if you look at the homeownership rate data for the younger cohorts, it is not increasing. It's in fact dropping a little bit in the recent quarters. And I think that's a reflection of the significant challenges that they face in the market. Some younger generation, some members of that younger generation were able to take advantage of low rates during the pandemic and to make moves. And I think for those that were able to sort of be early adopters or early actors, they did get ahead of the curve. But there are a lot of people that continue to sit on the sideline. And that's one of the reasons why we don't expect to see a huge increase in home sales next year, because even though affordability will start to improve, the market's going to remain fairly challenging, and affordability is nowhere near where it has been, over the better part of the last decade. So that is going to be a significant hurdle. The construction that we're, starting to see, it's not quite enough, but it is going to start to make headway. And those multifamily units that Danushka talked about being under construction, a lot of them are going to come to completion. And so for a lot of young households, especially who are on the fence trying to decide if they should rent or if they should buy, they're going to look at the monthly numbers. And in many cases, renting is going to be the better option. And of course, Lawrence talked about the wealth building that homeowners are able to do over time as they pay off their mortgage and build up that nest egg for themselves. I think delaying that because people are looking at the numbers and deciding to continue to rent longer is going to be unfortunate for those that aspect or that part of the generation that hasn't been able to get into the housing market early. So I think anything we can do to not just build more homes, but target those affordable price points to create access for that younger generation. Or you talked about student loan debt, helping them with that aspect of their budget. Or I know there have been proposals as well for a renewed first-time homebuyer tax credit, or something to that effect. Anything we can do to make getting in the door easier for that younger cohort, I think, is going to be very important.
Absolutely. And thinking about that, Danushka, you alluded to work that NAHB is doing to encourage folks into skilled trades. Can you talk a little about that? Because that sounds like something that could be quite encouraging for future generations.
Yeah, so we partner with our sister organization, the Home Building Institute, just to figure out what are the needs, right, for the industry. So we need around 700,000 new hires coming in every year, just to keep up with these retirements. So what we need to do is to convince, especially the parents, I believe. So we are offering at local HBAs apprenticeships to high school kids, and then bringing back the shop classes at the high schools. And then we've also partnered with Molly Elkman. She wrote the book called The House That She Built. It's a house in Utah that women exclusively, all women built that house. So it's an amazing story. So, there's a book behind it. She goes to schools and all of these events, promoting and telling the story of these women. So one part of it is that as we recover in the labor market, we are seeing, if we look at the labor force participation rate, right? The men, it's going down for various crises. And I think that's a failure in educational policies, part of it too. But women, it's increasing, it's trending up. So if we can even attract women to the construction trades, that would be fantastic. And part of the construction trades is modular and panelized construction, that we can actually do it in factories. Then you hire manufacturing workers as opposed to construction workers. So there are different ways I think we can improve the efficiencies and attract different, like a diverse background of workers to the trades, just to fill these gaps. And then, of course, immigration is a big part of it too. 25% of construction trades are immigrant labor. So if we can even figure out how do we even bring in workers, even on a temporary bipartisan, like some way, right? We need to bring in workers just to fill these gaps. So yeah, so those are some of the things that we need to do.
I think that's fantastic. I mean, looking at young adults, and perhaps the biggest way that we can convince parents of that is, can they fix something within the home? Because it's so hard to find a contractor and skilled labor to come out quickly. So maybe that's what we need to do. Those kids need to be breaking things within the homes and then fix them. It's a joke. All right, Danielle, I know you're a really optimistic person. You've talked about your optimism already here. Is there anything that makes you nervous going into 2024, that your optimistic forecast that everyone's looking forward to having lower mortgage interest rates, and it's going to help builders, it's going to help buyers out there, realtors out there? Is there anything that makes you nervous going into the year?
Yeah, so before I worked at NAR, one of the things I did was work with Dr. Alan Meltzer, writing a book called The History of the Fed. And the period that I worked with him on was the 1970s, which at the time didn't seem particularly relevant, but as my career has evolved, has become incredibly relevant. So what we saw in the 1970s, that inflation came not in one, but in 3 separate waves. And so I think I am sympathetic to Fed Chair Powell's concerns that inflation can be a tricky beast to tame. And, I think the Fed is going to be vigilant and make sure that maybe they were a little bit slow to get started when inflation reared its head in the most recent cycle. But I don't think they're going to let that happen again. But so for that reason, we may, if we were to see inflation reignite, we could see the Fed react faster than they did initially. And so we could see mortgage rates that are actually higher than everyone expects. Today's data was a solid step in the right direction. We are making progress, and as Lawrence pointed out, I agree with the improvement in rent prices is going to be a big contributor to improvement in inflation. Already, that shelter component is driving 70% of the annual increase in inflation, and our rent trends suggest that it's going to improve. So I think there are reasons to be optimistic, but if there's a concern, that's where it would be. And mortgage rates are a big part of the aspect of our forecast where we talk about improved affordability. And so if that doesn't improve, we continue to see the lock-in effect. We'll continue to see low inventory. We'll continue to see a housing market that is largely just frozen. And especially for younger generations, they'll probably continue to feel largely shut out of the purchase market and continue to rent longer, which has ramifications for their wealth building. So I think that's the biggest risk that I see for the housing market. I'm hopeful, but that is something to be aware of. And so that makes the inflation data as we go through the next year that much more important to watch.
Mm-hmm. Really, really good thoughts there. So I want to turn it both to you for any final thoughts going into 2024. What should realtors be looking for? What work can they do on the grounds to really help the lock-in effect and get this market moving?
Well, I can start. I can say, for existing homeowners, one thing that they may not think about is the amount of equity that they're sitting on. And so when making the decision about whether or not to make a change, whether to stay in place and remodel, or go ahead and find a new home, I think taking that equity into account, and so leveraging tools like you'll find online to help them figure out, okay, how much equity is in my home and how does that translate into a next home purchase. Because I don't think the lock-in effect is going to be solved like a cliff. I don't think we're going to see mortgage rates drop low enough where that is no longer a binding constraint for a lot of households. But instead, I think we're going to see households build up more equity over time, and that increases their number of options, regardless of whatever mortgage rates end up doing in the year ahead. I mean, we do see already there's a near high in the amount of equity that homeowners have in their home, and it's more broadly held than has historically been the case. So I do think that's going to be the key to unlocking the market for a lot of existing homeowners. And for buyers, I think the same advice that we've seen over the last couple of years is relevant. Set a budget, know what you have to have, know what you can live without, and stick to that budget because home prices continue to be high. And even though affordability is going to improve, you want to make sure any buyers that you're working with are set up for long-term success by not getting in over their head, which is still an easy thing to get carried away in a relatively competitive housing market.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the equity, I think we can confidently say that over the last year, seeing more than a quarter of the market paying all cash, they are certainly relying on that housing equity. And half of older boomers paying all cash for their next home, they're feeling very confident in this housing market. They're not impacted at all by rates as they move forward in that transaction. And certainly perhaps some opportunities for buyers moving forward. Danushka, any final thoughts? Optimism, pessimism, we'll take it all.
I think, there's so much room for the inventory to come in for the market. We can absorb it because the demographics are in our favor. So we desperately need, even at least like, the older boomers when they're downsizing. We know everybody's expecting, I guess, a silver tsunami. I guess I've been hearing that it's going to flood the market, crash the market. And I think, I don't think any of that's going to happen. It's the fact that we have a deficit. So I would welcome inventory in any form at this point. New homes, existing homes, whatever form it is. I think if we can see some sort of way that the price would stabilizes, interest rate stabilizes, if we can bring in the buyers, right, we need to create a affordable housing market. So for the future generations to be able to build that generational wealth.
Now I'm going to share everybody about the pricing.
Absolutely.
And I'll talk about the most
really good thoughts from both of you, Danielle,
first,
Danushka. Thank you so much for your time today. I know that everyone really enjoyed it. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Lawrence Yoon to take it away with the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great discussion. But let's shift our focus into the commercial along with the process. So I want to bring in Dr. Caitlin Sugari-Walter, who is a research vice president at the National Multi-Housing Council, who represent many top apartment developers, apartment owners in the market, and Ken Simonson, who is the chief economist at the General Contractors of America. Let me start with Caitlin. So the apartment sector, one graph that I had was that with so much oversupply, essentially we have 3 years of cyclical high. Last time we were at this level was back in the early 1980s. Are the apartment owners feel confident they can essentially rent out all the new units coming onto the market, or are they beginning to slash rent? What's happening there?
I think that it varies a lot by market. So when you look at it on the whole, yes, there's a lot of apartments under construction right now. They're not located everywhere though. And unfortunately, due to a lot of high costs, some of which Danusha just spoke about previously, just like they're impacting single family, they're also impacting multifamily. And so we can really only build to a certain price point. So what's happening is the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of these units that are coming online are coming in at the high end of the market. And so we are starting to see a little bit of filtering that's going on. The rent growth looks like it's varying tremendously by region. You look in the South and the West, they actually, according to RealPage, they had slightly negative rent growth last quarter. But when you look at the Northeast and the Midwest, that's not the case. They still have fairly strong rent growth. And so we are seeing that stuff is starting to be absorbed. The one concern we have, though, is actually we are in a shortage. We have a massive affordability crisis. And so this filtering is occurring. But as Danushka just talked about, we're expecting the starts for multifamily to slow down. So we actually are in a situation where we could be just, pushing it further down the line that we have a shortage. So while it looks like a ton, we actually need all that plus some.
So the multifamily housing start, staying with Caitlin, remains high, but the completion, is there more difficulty in trying to complete it or taking longer, especially in this higher interest rate environment, which interestingly means that Federal Reserve is producing a counterintuitive negative impact by lengthening the time, is causing more shortage, and therefore rents are not falling or decelerating as fast enough. So what's happening from start to finish?
So we are seeing some projects get put on hold. So it seems like, the rent growth is slowing at the same time that the interest rates are rising, so financing costs are going up. So yeah, we're seeing an impact from the interest rates, definitely, that some projects that perhaps were in the pipeline are no longer in the pipeline because they're they're just not financially viable anymore. So definitely if rates start to come down or rents start to increase, then we could see even more projects get started.
Ken, so you travel across the country. I know you speak with your members constantly. What are some issues they're facing, or are they just generally happy there's jobs right and left, whether it's on commercial building, residential building? So what's the overall attitude among the general contractors of America?
Well, our members build everything other than single family, so we certainly have a different perspective from most of the members of NAHB. Our members do some of the larger, most of the larger multifamily projects, and then every type of non-residential building and a non-building infrastructure project. And the folks who are putting in the massive manufacturing plants, the endless data centers, and looking forward to huge amounts of money for power and infrastructure projects, they are doing well and have great expectations. The folks who are dependent on developer financed projects, whether it's multifamily, warehouse, certainly office, all of those are looking pretty grim. They may be busy right now, but it's partly because of that supply chain issue that Danushka referred to, transformers and switch gear. If you can't get the power into the building, step down from the voltage outside into the building and then distribute it through the building. If you can't install and operate elevators and HVAC systems, communications and security systems, that multifamily multifamily project is going to sit there and run up costs. And I think that is part of the reason that we have this record or close to record number of multifamily projects still under construction. I was actually with someone from one of the major switchgear manufacturers last Friday. He told the audience that, yes, the delivery time has gotten a little better. It's gone from 80 weeks to 70 weeks. Well, that's totally unacceptable to have a building that is going to sit there for a year and a quarter or more until you can electrify it. And he said he doesn't expect real improvement for another year, even though his company and competitors are building capacity. Now, other supply chain issues have gotten better, but I have to say I'm a little concerned about what we'll be seeing in 2024 on cement products, particularly ready-mix concrete, but also precast, which is essential for getting the infrastructure for water and sewer or the panels on a multifamily building. That last year there were major problems. It kept getting worse, and then abruptly they disappeared. I haven't heard about any problems this year, but I'm also not reading about big additions to cement capacity. For some reason, no one wants one of those plants in their neighborhood, and yet the demand is going to be growing for all of those project types that I mentioned. So I think 2024, well, let me say for 2023, members definitely caught a break on materials costs after the torments of supply chain shortages in 2020 up through mid-2022. Things got a lot better. I look every month at a producer price index for inputs to new construction, and that's been basically flat on the non-residential side, and a little better, a little decline in terms of residential, but I think that's going to turn around. So my expectation is 4 to 6% material costs, quite possible for multifamily and non-residential projects next year. And then labor costs, certainly still a concern. Labor availability, probably the #1 concern the contractors mentioned.
Yes, exactly.
So Ken, let me stick with you. Something about the labor shortage in the home building industry. Now you are representing the other side of general contractor, various work. We are seeing broadly at the national level, job growth beginning to slow down, with the possibility that some economists are saying it could actually be a negative job growth going into next year. But in your industry, you still have much more job opening compared to people who are willing to go into the industry. And what is the age profile? Do we really need to, as a country, need to focus more people into going into construction, going into general contractor, rather than say, go get your 4-year degree in college and come out with a student debt?
Oh, absolutely. And so the 89 chapters of AGC and our member companies are doing many of the things that Anushka mentioned in terms of reaching out to school systems at all levels, to community colleges, to workforce development agencies, to try to interest people in construction. But we're doing more than that. I look as part of the employment report at the series called Average Hourly Earnings for Production and Non-Supervisory Employees. It's a long way of describing most of the craft workers, the folks you see with hard hats on a job site, as well as office workers who aren't supervisors. And that pay has been going up at a 5.9% rate over the last 12 months in construction, whereas in the total private sector, it has slowed to a 4.3% increase. So clearly the industry is trying to attract more workers with pay, but also better working conditions. You heard the mention of the book about.
Let me do California for the sake of it. Oh, Washington. I'm going to Washington. Let me do Washington. Doesn't matter what county. Remember at the GNCC, we might be able to still do like David said, it's possible 9 point something for the EPPS or whatever. But for the most non-QA, you need to get this pricing. So 750 is fine. Let's try. Did I put rental? No, not the primary. I put a 5-year prepay. You can change 3 or 1 year. Please do not quote only no prepay on the rental property. You're guaranteed to lose the loan. That's why you don't have a loan. If people complain, okay? So you have to listen. So when people doesn't have enough loan, listen other people first. That's why come to office. Listen other people talk. You learn a lot. That's how I learned my first 3 months business. I listened to another loan officer doing very well. How they talk to customers. I just over here. What do you call? year dropping. Yeah, so year dropping is very helpful. Year dropping. 2 years. Yeah. Okay. 8.125, but it's a 5-year prepay. But it's a 20% down. Investment. Oh, a lot of people ask me, James, where's the guideline? All right. We'll just put this guideline here. RJ here. Click here. There's a guideline. You guys see it? We put a guideline. Things everyone request, we put a guideline here. Oh, God. You got to do, just click it. You have to do something with it. Yeah. Maybe I do another one. In-house Onyx. I think, I don't know. I think you're able to